I think if you start with the earliest principle that you are working with a child, it's just a child. And I think what we have known for a long time across the sector, and we've really worked that in New Horizon, is that these are just children and they have been involved in some behaviours that in the future, they'll move away from. And they have previously been defined as young offenders. And I think for us, working with them as children has really allowed us to focus on who they are. So I think the word identity is kind of a formal way of just talking about who that child is. And I think if you lose some of the labels associated, child in care, child in custody, young offender that used to be around, and you are just looking at who that child is. And I think that was the principle always of our work, is just getting to know them as a person and as a child. So in terms of the identity shift, I think it's really, really key, because you just are focusing solely on them and who they are. And then you're kind of thinking about who they want to be and where they're going. It's all about that child, that individual. So I think what we try to really think about is where are they at? And this might mean that we spend weeks having conversations with them about, for example, Love Island, or whatever's on the telly, wherever they are at that time. It's about letting them lead, and it's about letting them letting us get to know them at their pace, basically. And I think trust is really important. It's one of the principles that we think about, because we're trying to develop a trusting relationship with that child. So our beginning of our approach is just getting to know them in their way, in a way that they're happy with. And we use this kind of term, negotiated contact. So we negotiate with them when they want to see us, how much time they want to spend with us. And we're really clear that, if you don't want to see us next week, that's absolutely fine. Or if you don't come to your visit, we're going to write to you and see if you'd like us to come back. We're not just going to not come back, So it's about getting to know them first as a person and building trust. And then it kind of naturally progresses, and they will bring to us things they'd like to do, things they'd like to achieve, things that they thought they would be doing in their life that might have gone in a different direction because of things that have happened. I think it's absolutely essential, and I think it's something is underpinned this whole project. And I have to break that down into kind of verbal and non-verbal communication, because I think the children that we've worked with and children in custody are so astute, and they're so used to picking up non-verbal messages. So from your body language, whether you show up or not, whether you do what you say you're going to do. So I think for us, if we take the kind of verbal communication first of all, what you say to a child is so important, because again, some of these children have had really, really traumatic histories, and their sense of themselves it can be quite challenging and quite difficult, and their sense of themselves may be quite negative based on their previous experiences. So we've found a lot that the children are quite testing of us, and there's a couple of clients I can think of who've definitely pushed the boundaries and kind of really challenged my staff to see what they'd get back, to see how safe that person is and how far they can push them, where their boundary is. So I think the kind of what you say to a child in those settings is really, really important. And especially for a child in custody, because when you leave, they've got so much time for that to filter in, to think about what you've said, and especially if you're the only person outside of the people on their wing that they've seen that week, what you say has a real impact, and it's really important. But also it's that non-verbal communication, and we were so fortunate as part of this partnership to have the Camden Islington NHS Foundation Trust working with us, kind of led by Project 1010, because we had weekly reflection sessions with a clinical psychologist who really helped us to think about those non-verbal communications. So if you're not able to turn up, or if you present completely differently one week than you did the week before, it really helps us to think through that stuff, but also to think through the non-verbal communication of the children. So if they don't turn up one week, we might have a session on the Thursday week and really think about, what does that mean? Was something said last week that was really difficult? what the kind of workers at the Early Intervention and Prevention Service have allowed us to do is to kind of be that voice coming in and out of the prison, kind of bringing that weekly update really about how they're feeling, how they're doing, any problems they've had in custody, if they're missing someone in their family, can we get them in to see them, that kind of stuff. And they've then built that into the plans with kind of our views and the child's views. So I think that's been about how we've made it concrete, is about the partnerships. And I don't think it would have worked as well if we hadn't had that trust from the statutory partners, because they've really trusted us. They've really allowed us to build that relationship, and they've really respected the views that we've been bringing and the kind of voice of the child that we've been bringing to those meetings. So that's definitely one of the ways that we've translated it into practice. Yeah, I think the plans that are made are more sustainable because the child's involved, and I think the child would definitely have been involved before. And like I said, the workers from Camden Early Intervention and Prevention Service are really, really good, and they're really in touch with the children, and they have really trusting relationships. That's what we've found anyway. Sometimes we're coming on board where there are already a network of really trusting relationships. But I think where it's made it much more sustainable is much earlier down the line, we're able to say, actually, I know the plan is for this person to return home, and they're scared to say this at a meeting because they don't want to offend this family member they're meant to be returning to, but actually they don't feel safe there because of the community area around them and stuff. So I think resettlement has worked better because we're able to raise issues a lot earlier. And also, I think as part of these relationships, what happens is the child is on board with their resettlement plan and involved in designing it. So they've actually got some ownership of it when they come out and some sense of control over it. And I think what you see with these children is they've had sometimes a lifetime of very little control and very little power. So when you actually give them a part of that and they can, have some say in what's going to happen to me when I come out, I think that makes it more successful. And I think from my experience of, in this work, what's happened before is there's a massive gulf sometimes between being in custody and being out, and children can make massive changes, mentally in custody, they can really think about where they want to be differently. And unfortunately, if that's not connected up with outside and what's going to happen when they come home, it can be a really, really vulnerable time for them where they can really slip back. So hopefully what this project has allowed, the network to do is to kind of bring those two closer together so that when they come out, it's not such a massive jump and people kind of know where they are before they come out rather than, it being a surprise. So yeah, in that way, I think it's been a success. And I think that was one of the challenges in the beginning, is just kind of working out where we fit. And I think as well, some children have got a network that may have, 12 or 13 professionals in it. I think for my staff, it was a sense of, okay, so, where do I fit into this network? How do I have a voice here? Because some of the stuff I'm bringing from this child might be a bit controversial and it doesn't necessarily fit with some of the plans. So I think that in the early days, that was quite challenging. And another very practical challenge we faced was access. So access to custody. And we've been really supported by the custodial places that we visit. But I think because obviously their regimes are different and because of the COVID pandemic, we did have some challenges around access, which I think it would be really great, if this has been replicated elsewhere, to think about entering into those partnerships early and kind of having maybe a room put aside or some space, where these meetings can take place, because often we've been reliant on booking legal visits, which again can be difficult if they're booked up, and we've said to a child, yeah, we'll come next week and see you. So I think access has been key. What we know from a third sector provider is that children are in contact with us. They do work with us, and we're really fortunate. We've got really great partnerships. But I also know of a lot of other third sector and voluntary providers who find it really hard to work in partnership and sometimes build that trust. So I think what this will do is build capacity that is already there. It will just bring these partners and these agencies together, all with a kind of shared aim, really. And I also think that there's so much change at the moment going on, in this, not just in the youth justice world, but kind of, in the criminal justice world around, trauma-informed practice and, changing the labels around children that are impacted by offending. And I think this is a great time for an approach like this to be rolled out, because we can really capitalise on the progress that's been made around, recognising that giving these children control, co-producing approaches, that they actually are the most effective ways of working, and they will have the longest and most sustainable impact.